Hi, everyone, and welcome to Bookish Road Trip's Roadshow. I am Lee Bukowski. I'm your host. I'm also the author of the award-winning women's fiction novel, A Week of Warm Weather. Hopefully you'll check that out. And I am so excited about our episode today. I can't think of a better topic for readers and travelers and book lovers and writers. So today's episode is called La Bella Vita, The Good Life. And so we're going to be exploring Italian culture, and heritage through fiction. One programming note, if you are watching us, if you would allow StreamYard to access your Facebook name. That way, if you leave comments or ask questions, which we hope you will, we will know who you are. If you don't do that, then we won't know who you are. And we'd like to know who you are. We'd like to know who's joining us. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my fabulous panel of talented authors. We have C. D'Angelo, award-winning women's fiction author of The Difference and The Visitor. We have Mario Dell'Olio. Among his many accolades, he's the author of several books, including one he'll be talking about with us today, Letters from Italy, a transatlantic love story. Diana Giovinazzo, podcast host and critically acclaimed author of Antoinette's Sister. And Rob Samborn, he is the author of the historical thrillers, The Prisoner of Paradise and The Painter of the Damned. So welcome to my panel. Welcome to everyone who's joining us. Hi, Grace. Grace is here. So first, let's just take a minute. I would like all of you to just kind of do a little introduction, expand on that introduction, talk a little bit about your work as it pertains to our episode today. So Mario, let's start with you.
Great. I am the author of 5 books at this point, but Letters from Italy has gotten the most attention. I'm a music teacher and conductor of choirs, and my family I'm first generation, so my family is all Italian, and so I wrote this great book about my parents' love story. So
great. Oh, so it's your parents' love story. Okay, I'm so excited to talk about this. I will say there's nothing like reading the bios of fascinating people like all of you to humble me. You know, I'm reading about you're directing music and you're hosting podcasts and you're traveling and you're entrepreneurs and you're screenwriting, and I'm just so pleased with myself when all my laundry's folded and put away. So I think I have to step it up a little bit. But all right, C, let's hear from you.
I think you're also very accomplished, by the way. Hi, everyone. I'm C. D'Angelo. I write women's fiction that is more in the subgenre of chick lit. And they're quirky stories with a lot of seriousness at the same time of Italian-American heroines filled with food, culture, travel, and a lot of the Italian values and such. I have 2 books, The Difference and The Visitor.
Great. And I'm almost finished. I'm actually reading The Difference, and I should be finished with it by now, but my life keeps getting in the way. So I'm really enjoying it.
Thank you.
Diana.
Hi, I'm Diana Giovinazzo. I am the author of Antoinette's Sister, which is behind my big head here. I'm also the author of The Woman in Red, which was my debut novel. I'm a historical fiction author specializing in Italian history. I'm also a podcast co-host and co-creator. My podcast is called Wine, Women, and Words, and we just sit around and drink wine and talk about books.
That sounds terrible. I can't.
I know, right?
You just described it usually every evening for me. Okay, welcome, Rob.
Hi, everybody. So it's great to be here. So Lee, thanks so much for having me, and Mario and C and Diana. It's great to be on the panel with you. I am Rob Samborn. I'm an author of 3 books that are dual timeline historical thrillers. Happen to have them here. So Prisoner of Paradise, Painter of the Damned, and also a 3rd one called The Swordsman of Venice. So they are all set in the present day or around the Renaissance, primarily in Italy and mostly in Venice.
Okay, great. So I think my first question, I think I know Mario, Rob, I think you have extensive history in Italy, but so have you all been to Italy? Mario, I know you have. Have you lived there?
Yes, actually, I did my graduate work in Rome at the Gregorian University, Pontifical Gregorian University. I was studying to become a Roman Catholic priest at that time, so I did live in Rome for a bit. And I have first cousins and uncles, aunts and uncles in the Puglia region of Italy. So I go back and visit there quite often. And in addition, as a teacher, I brought my choirs to sing in Italy on many occasions. So
that actually has been my only opportunity to visit Italy. I was 17. It was a school trip, so I don't even know if we can count that.
Yeah, we totally
did have a trip scheduled with my family, and then of course COVID. So looking forward to getting back there soon. Rob, how about you? You're really a slacker. You've only visited what, 40 countries?
I have been to 40 countries. Yeah, I think actually I'm up to 41 now. I need to up my bio. So yes. So first of all, I should point out that there are two types of people in the world: those who are Italian and those who want to be Italian.
I couldn't agree more. Could not agree more.
I should probably change the spelling of my last name to Samborno or Sambora, because I fall into the latter category. I'm not Italian, but I love all things Italy. I've been there a number of times. And yeah, I did live in Italy for a brief period of time. I spent the summer in Florence during college, actually. So not studying, though. I actually worked in a leather market selling leather jackets by day. And by night, I was in a band. By far the absolute best summer of my life.
Wow. Again, looking at my own life, although I will say when I visited, I did bring leather goods back from Florence, gifts for everyone, which they did love. And so I can attest to the
You may
leather.
have bought them from me or someone who was working in the stall another time.
Maybe. Oh my gosh.
If you would have said handbags, I would be immediately texting you or something.
Yeah, for me, I don't think my store may have had a couple of handbags, but we focused on jackets primarily. Yeah, but it wasn't that, in the Marchetto di San Lorenzo, which is basically the leather market. So it's all sorts of leather wares in that market. Journals, briefcases, all that.
Yes, I visit. That's where it's just a huge market of all things leather, which is awesome. Yeah. Diana, how about you? You been to Italy?
Yes, I was 16 when I first went to Italy, so it totally counts. And then, like you, we had a trip planned during COVID that got canceled, but thankfully we were able to go back this past September. And my husband, along the lines of the whole Italian leather, lover, he's become that. He bought a wallet. He really needed a wallet. He bought one in Italy, and to this day, randomly he'd be like, "Oh, I love my wallet," or just even randomly going, "My wallet's so soft." In his pocket.
That's amazing. So that was a great purchase for him.
Oh yes.
And see, how about you?
Yeah, for my 10th wedding anniversary, we went to a few different cities: Venice, Florence, Rome, Pisa, and Pompeii. And then we took a cruise a few years ago out of Venice again. So I know Venice very well. Rob, I think that's why I love your books. And we're planning to go back next year for our 20th anniversary, but we're going to do the Amalfi Coast and hopefully Sicily, especially because it's tied to one of my books, The Visitor.
Right. Yes.
Let me just jump in there. I can't wait to read that book. I'm bringing a group of singers to Sicily in March, so I'm going to have to read it before then.
Yes.
Oh, I'd be honored. Thank you.
Oh, that's excellent. That's excellent. And Rob, I do agree with you. And I was telling, and for our viewers, we were talking before we went live, that despite my last name, which is my married last name, I also am Italian. I am a Padavani. So, I agree. I think that those two groups of people definitely do exist. So great. Okay. Well, let's talk about, so specifically what parts of Italian culture and heritage do you incorporate into your writing? What I love about all of you although you all incorporate these things into your writing, your genres are so different. And I think that makes all of you so interesting, but there is definitely this one this is the common thread. So Rob, let's start with you. So specifically, what is it about Italian culture and heritage that you incorporate into your writing?
Honestly, it's everything. So my books are written in very deep, multiple third-person perspectives. So I try to cover Italian culture from two different angles. One is that, so the main characters are American tourists who go to Venice and then they get caught up in this whole adventure and everything. So it's from, and neither of them they're an American couple. Neither of them have ever been to Italy when the book opens. So I want readers who have never been there to experience from their eyes and their perspectives. So everything from the incredible food, the rich culture that goes back literally thousands of years, and everything from music to art and all that. But then I also have other perspectives from present day Italians and also Italians from the Renaissance. So I've literally done like thousands of hours of research, including a research trip to Venice. So from both, and again, my first book takes place in Venice. So that's primarily where my research is. The other books take place also in a couple of other places. But so looking at Venice specifically, which even is a very unique, I was going to say city, but it goes beyond even city. It's just like a unique world even within Italy. Venice itself used to be its own republic. So looking at it from a present day Venetian's point of view, looking at like what Venice was and what Venice has become, and then also going back 400 years and what Venice was like. So in answer to your question, Lee, I try to incorporate literally as much as possible from that character's perspective and how that character is navigating the story and what can be brought in culturally. But like, it's constantly around them, everything. And wine too, by the way, Diana.
You gotta have the wine.
There's a lot of drinking in my books.
We're not opposed to that. That is so fascinating. I think a lot of countries have that, where there are specific cities that really are worlds unto themselves. And so that's really interesting about Venice. Diana.
Yes. Well, see, for me, historical fiction, writing that, I think almost all of my books, I try to integrate as much Italian into it as possible, especially because I'm writing about Italian history. And so that's really the focus of the books. My two books are centered around actual women who lived in Italy, Maria Carolina, especially the Queen of Naples and Sicily. She still is very beloved in southern Italy, and writing about her. And it's not just the culture itself that I try to focus on and the history itself. It's aspects of what a woman of that time period would be doing in that country. And food, I think, also plays a vital role in not just Italian culture, because we do love our food as much as we love our wine, let's face it. Food also speaks to our culture, to our time period. What we're eating today is different from what we ate 200-300 years ago. And what would they be eating? And what's the difference between what a queen like Maria Carolina was eating on a daily basis versus my first book with Antoinette, Nita Garibaldi, and what she was eating as a poor woman in Brazil before she came to Italy with her husband Garibaldi. And so it's really integrating all of that to create as much of the history as I can, so that it comes to life.
That's so interesting. And I've been reading about all of your work, and I'm ordering books. I don't know how long I'm going to have to live to actually read all the books that I order, but I can't stop. You can't stop. But food is one of the things we'll talk about. And I think, and it's so interesting when you talk about how it's based on, in your writing, not just what we eat today. That is so interesting. I did not even think about that. And you think about food, Italians, I mean, food is so much a part of our culture. And I think even as Italian Americans, as I am, food really, it is the center, I think, of our culture. And you hear these funny stories, and they are funny to people who think that they're not real. And we follow these funny things on social media, and literally, I know in my family, you could show up with an axe through your skull, and it would be, oh, did you eat? That's why you have an axe through your skull, your skin and bones. I mean, everything revolves around food. And it's not just the food, it's the quantity, and it's really the part, what takes place around the table. I think a lot of it for Italians that is so important. And so that's great. That's fascinating that that's such a big part of your writing. See, I read your book at night, and I want to tell you, I'm not a nighttime snacker, but your book makes me very hungry as I'm reading it at night. So if I put on any weight, I'm going to be coming for you.
That is what I hear, that it makes people hungry. I was writing it as I was losing weight, so that's ironic. But it was hard. But yeah, I honestly, like what you just both said, I didn't realize how much food was in the difference, honestly, or the visitor. But I had a little more of an awareness for the visitor because of what people were saying about the difference. It's just part of me. I mean, I'm eating lunch. I'm thinking, what am I going to eat for dinner? What am I going to cook? Like, I mean, it's just part of who we are, I think, and how we've always grown up. And exactly, I couldn't have said it better than you two. But that's why my books are so filled with the food. And I love, especially, I tie each book to an area of Italy. So the first one's tied to Genoa, the second one to Sicily. So it's like those kinds of cuisines. And this third one I just finished the first draft of is tied to an area near Milan. So I got to research some of those cuisines in the Pavia region. It's just beautiful. Now I want to cook so much more, but I don't have time.
I'm definitely missing the boat. I definitely need to go to Italy to either research or pretend I'm researching for a book, but so I can spend some extended time there for sure.
Just eat there.
Yes, exactly. Just to eat there. Yes. And the quantity of food, I think, is something that amazes people. I know my friends who aren't Italian, when they see just the sheer quantity of food that is put out at any one of it doesn't even have to be a big gathering, but it is just such an integral part of Italian culture. So I think one of the questions, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I just, I didn't get a chance to answer that one.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mario. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, for me, Italian culture is ubiquitous. I grew up in an Italian family where Italian was spoken. I'm first generation. So my parents spoke English only as a second language. And so, hearing stories about the old country was part of, that was part of my life. And so when my father passed, my mother gifted me with the love letters that the two of them had written back in the 1950s. And I'm the only one of their four children that actually speaks Italian. So my mother wanted to give me those letters so I could read them and know about them. And I just asked her to read them to me rather than having me read them myself. And so I had my iPhone on her, and as she read her love letters and my father's love letters, these images of Italy came forward and all this history. And I was like, I have to write this down. I have to write this story, So Italian culture and food and all of that stuff is all throughout the book. And, this is a picture of them on their honeymoon, in Milano. And it's all based on their love letters. So
it's just so beautiful that you were able to take those letters and turn them into such a beautiful novel. And I wondered, when I first saw the cover, is that a picture of someone real? And so of course, as I read more about you and found out that it was, that's just such a beautiful thing that you did. May I ask, is your mother is still living?
My mother is still living. She's 91 years old.
Oh, wow.
And so I just visited her in Connecticut, and I just translated the book into Italian with her help. And so she is still very sharp in telling me stories.
That is amazing. Yeah. That's wonderful. Oh, how awesome. Well, actually, that kind of leads into my next question, which is what I think everyone always asks authors. And Mario, you just touched on it, but if you would like to expand at all, people always want to know what in your books, if anything, is based on your real life. So Mario, we know that Letters from Italy is actually your parents' love story. But go ahead and expand on that.
So, like my father had emigrated from Italy to New York City and lived with his immigrant parents. And he saw a photograph of my mother that his brother had sent, because his brother got engaged to my mother's cousin. And he was like, "Who is that girl? I want to write to her." And so they wrote to each other for 2 years without ever having met.
Wow.
And when they finally met, they decided to get married. And, I guess the book is really creative nonfiction, because I had to recreate dialogue. I had to recreate the scenes. And I had to look back to my grandparents, whom I never met, on my mother's side, and their stories, and why people moved away from Italy. Like, what was it? What was the economic why were the economic ills so bad during the time of Mussolini and before? And so there was a lot of research that I had to do, because I heard stories, but I didn't know how much of it was true and how much of it was, allegory. Because Italians do like to tell stories, but yeah, I mean, it's learning about our own history was one of the most exciting things for me. And so their stories are every immigrant's stories in many ways.
They really are. My father is 83, and he he's fine, but he doesn't, you can't, like, well, I think I should do this too. You walk into a room, you forget why you walked in there. But he remembers stories from 75 years ago. Many of the stories told to him by his parents and grandparents, and because he was born here, but his parents were not. And so it is, storytelling for Italians is also another thing that's just so part of our culture, and they love to tell stories. But I agree with you, Mario. You do need a little fact checking here and there, because we also like to embellish. But it's so great. It's just so amazing that you were able to do that. What a beautiful legacy. So that's terrific.
Well, I just have to say, it's just a beautiful thing for my mother. She says that she reads the letters. She reads the book when she can't sleep at night. She reads the happy parts. So, anyway.
That's awesome. That's awesome. See, how about you? What do we, again, from your own life, what have you integrated? Anybody, a character, an event, anything that comes or is loosely associated with this is what always people want to know.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say I got chills 3 times when you were speaking, Mario. That, I read your book. I love your book, of course, but hearing you speak about it in that way I'm getting chills again. Oh, okay. So for me, I wrote The Difference in honor of my grandpa. And so the character of the grandpa in there, although it's a different name than he had, is very much like him. And there's a lot of my own, like kind of the meals that we'd have, that kind of history for myself is in there. And also the stories about trying to find out why her grandpa never wanted to talk about his immigration. And that part is true about my grandpa, although the story is completely different than the reason why the grandpa in the book didn't want to. And then the second book I wrote, The Visitor, is in honor of my grandma. And so I created a character in there that is very much like her. Her name was Mary. My main character's name is Mary, but that's not the character like her. There's another character in there that is named Patsy, which ironically was not her father, but my grandpa's father's nickname. So I kind of combined some things there. So there's a lot of me in both books, and even in some of the characters.
Yeah, and see, when I read your book, I hear you talking, and we've gotten to know each other through Bookish Road Trip. But I love that I feel like I'm listening to you talking when I read your book, and I think, I don't think we can help that, right? I think, and just what you were saying, certain things may not be the exact story, but of course we look at our own experiences, and that's our outlet. That's what we want to do. We want to tell stories and relate them to ourselves. Rob, I'm guessing, I don't know, but I'm guessing that your soulmate is not in a painting in Italy. Who knows, though? Really? Who am I to say?
I'm kidding. She's downstairs.
So you've so is there any, again, it's a little bit different for you. Is there anything, a character maybe, or anybody that's based on anyone you actually know or yourself?
So not who I know. You know, I think, of course, like every author, I throw in a couple of little things here and there that are, you know, based on my own experiences and stuff like that. But my book, even though it's fiction, revolves around real places, things, and people. So The Prisoner of Paradise, that is based, or the titular subject of The Prisoner of Paradise, I should say, is a painting called Paradise, or Il Paradiso, by Jacopo Tintoretto, Renaissance master. And it's a real painting in Venice. It's the world's largest painting. It's gigantic. So everything like that is totally real. So all of the buildings, the artwork, all that stuff is real in the present day. And in the scenes that take place in the past, most of the characters are real as well as some real events and things like that. And then in terms of like my own life, what I can say is that because I've traveled so much, you know, again, the main characters of the book are Americans who are there on vacation, and it's their first time in Italy. Mm-hmm. So because I've traveled so much, I can look at my own experiences and apply that to how they might be reacting or experiencing something that is going on in the plot around them.
Right. So you actually can think about what it's like for a person to visit Italy for the first time and what that experience is like. So
exactly.
Yeah. That's yes. Yeah. And Diana, again, I think for you, this is probably, I don't know, but who knows? I mean, even though your books are historical fiction, and you have, I love historical fiction. I love real events, and then these fictional stories that are created against it and from these real events. But what do you think about this?
You know, even though it's historical, there are aspects that we can find that connect us to the history, to our ancestors. You know, on the very basic surface of things, my grandparents were, or not my grandparents, but my great-grandparents and ancestors were still living in Italy at the time of Italian unification and during Maria Carolina's reign. So being able to explore these politics that would have affected my family during that time period was really fascinating for me. And then with Antoinette's sister here behind me, I started writing that quite literally 2 weeks before the pandemic started. And at around that same time, my best friend had been diagnosed with cancer. And with the combination of the pandemic where I couldn't see her, I couldn't be there to support her, help her family, I had to stay, we all had to stay in our homes. And it was especially scary for her when she would have to go to treatments to go to the hospital, because that was a risk in and of itself because of the pandemic, because of COVID. And I really started to connect with Maria Carolina, where there was this great distance between her and her sister, who the two of them were so close. They were raised as twins when they were children. And there's this great difference between them. Her sister was in France. She was in Italy. My best friend was only an hour away, but given the pandemic and her being sick, it felt like she was as far away as France. And so COVID and all of that became very much the aggressor, as Maria Carolina looked at France and the revolution and Napoleon as the aggressors towards her sister. I felt that connection. I felt that anger that Maria Carolina felt when she was going through all of that with her sister.
That's so interesting. Unfortunately, I know all too well. I also have a family member who was diagnosed with cancer right before COVID, and the same thing, so being separated. And so you being able to channel that feeling of being separated from, the people you love most, that's so interesting. And isn't it just interesting what what we find that really drives us and really we can incorporate into our writing.
Exactly. And with history, we, as 21st century people, 20th century people, what have you, depending upon what century you were born in, that we now have to say, we look back at history as being this thing that just happened. And we look at the people who founded countries and these great people and putting them on pedestals, but they were all just people. And the one connection that I think that's great about historical fiction is that we see that there were real people who had real struggles, real wants, real desires, real flaws. And we get to explore that through the history, because we really aren't that much different now, theoretically, like now as in like who we are as people, as humans, than we were 150 years ago, 200 years ago.
That's so true. And Diana, I'll continue. I think you may have I think you touched on this, so I'll ask this next question, is that we're talking about Italian culture and heritage, and as we all agree, everybody either is or wants to be Italian. But so what is it then that you think, and I think you just certainly touched on one thing for sure, what is it that makes all of your writing appealing to not just people who are Italian or want to read about Italy or Italians? And so, Diana, you just answered that, but if you want to expand on that, or if you have I know there are other parts of your writing that appeal to readers as well who aren't Italian.
Of course, I'll expand on it. I like to talk. I mean, it's the fact that there's so much that we have in common with people, regardless of culture and backgrounds. I was just talking with an author recently about the family dynamics of things. Her book happened to be based on a Jewish family, and I love reading about families and their stories, because the family dynamics aren't necessarily as different. We can touch on that. And there are these universal truths to the human experience, regardless of what culture you're from, that we can connect to. And I think that's one of the things that all kinds of fiction helps us with. And it's very true with that study that was done, I don't know how many years ago, that people who read fiction are more empathetic towards other people in general, because we can grasp onto the fact that there are people who are different from us.
Yeah, that is so true. And I always talk to people when I speak, after my book just launched in June, and we talk about this all the time. Even though we write fiction, people connect with fictional characters. They just do, because our readers are people who struggle. They struggle with all sorts of things. They're real people with real problems. And, I think we're getting better as a society, but if you just go back even a few decades, people didn't talk about things the way they do now. They really just didn't. And, I think that our fiction writing with these people, and I know my book touches on a lot of very sensitive issues, but they're conversation starters. And I think that's what readers really do relate to. And you're right. I mean, I think that's so true, that people who read fiction are very empathetic. They understand the struggles that people are going through. But so Rob, what do you think? What do you think is the most appealing? Obviously the setting and the beautiful setting where your books take place, but what do you think is appealing even to people who aren't, who don't, other than just being set in Italy and all things Italian?
It's very much like what you both said, and I do think that a lot of cultures around the world obviously revolve around family, but I think that Italian culture is even more so revolves around family, and not just family, but just connections and relationships between people. But then the other nice thing about it is also the connection to history, which is really important. A lot of times when you think about Italian history, I don't know, maybe this is just me, even though I've studied it extensively, you kind of just think about, you sort of separate it between like the Roman Empire and then post-Roman Empire. At least I do, for whatever weird reason. But the reality is that all that Roman Empire and pre-Roman Empire stuff is all part of like this massive incredibly rich and depth and complex history. And I think that when you add all those things up, and the other weird thing about it, I don't know if it's weird, but unique is really the way, you know, is that you have this peninsula, right, that is dramatically different from everything else around. I mean, you can make the same argument around about those places too, but it's really, really, really very interesting. But then you also have pieces that are brought in from other cultures, particularly like the Far East and Greece and things like that. So you have this blending, you know, it's kind of the, like Italian food, where it's just like this blending of the best ingredients, right? Like Italian food is really all about like use of ingredients, as opposed to like French food, which is, I think French food is great too, but it's more about like the sauces, you know. Italian food is more about like the ingredients and putting like how to work those ingredients together. So I sort of feel like it's that. I'm not exactly sure what kind of point I'm trying to make, but it's like you bring everything together and intertwine it. So whether it's connections between people, connections between art and music or food or drinks, not just alcoholic drinks, by the way. You look at stuff just like coffee, right? Like coffee is not historically an Italian thing, yet it's arguably the best coffee in the world. So I think it's a pretty interesting thing to look at that. But you bring, it's kind of like the whole entire universe of what is included that I think makes it so appealing.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, and I agree with you. It's that putting together of the ingredients, and not just with food, as you said. C, what do you think?
Yeah, everyone's stating it beautifully. I think also with the relatability to most cultures, there's also this element of the connection to people that's so important in the heritage. And so I know, like for me in my day job, I'm a psychotherapist. And so I feel and hope that I'm able to really get an emotional reaction out of people and to help people feel heard. And especially in my first book, the person is the main character is very anxious and feeling mildly depressed. And it's about what happens in your life because of all of that. And so I think that there's, you know, an ability to see that that's very relatable no matter where you come from. And so there's many aspects of the number of relatable topics, I think, in all of our books to many different cultures.
Yes, definitely. I agree. Mario, what do you say?
Yeah. So in my book, it's interesting. I think about the way people date right now online without ever having met each other. And
I was going to say that when you talked about them writing letters, I was going to say it was social media before it was social media, right?
Exactly. It's like Match.com and all this stuff. I mean, it's interesting. You know, they said in their letters, if they met after all this time writing and they didn't click in person, they would part as friends. And I think that's like the first date when people actually agree to finally meet, whether there's going to be the spark that there was when they were communicating in written language. And then I think the other thing that makes my book relatable is that, you know, people looking for a better life, you know, trying to make it better and, you know, and then maintaining their culture in a foreign land, right? You know, and that's certainly something they did as they sat around the dinner table. So.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's so true of you know, everybody in the end, we want hope that things can improve and things can be better. And so again, I think that's definitely one of the draws of reading fiction. We have some great comments with some people. There are people whose names we can't see. We have one, and I think it was Mario when you were talking about, or no, maybe it was C when you were talking about why people left Italy. Someone said, my grandmother left her village in Italy because all the young men had left for America. What better reason? So funny. So we're, you know, a little bit of time left, but I'm wondering, and I don't know, that's what I want to hear from you guys. If your books weren't set in Italy, would you be able to write the same story? So, and right now, as I said, I've ordered all the books, but see, I'm reading yours and I'm thinking, okay, could this person have, for example, an Irish grandfather? And when we talk about would it be the same? Could you write the same book if it was something other than Italy and Italian culture or heritage? What do you think? Would it pack the same punch?
You're asking me, right?
Yes, I'm asking you first.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. Just like Diana was saying, no.
Tell us what you really think, see?
So here's the thing. The core of it is what we were just talking about. Right. And that's why it's so relatable, right? The human experience, the emotions, the enjoyment of food, the family values, that is very common. But you can't have the flair that we have and the being surrounded by the specific art, music, and architecture and everything that you have in Italy, or just being Italian American and hearing the stories about that, or and so forth. So I think though they're really stories, it's not possible.
You could have a person trying to look up their whatever other Irish or whatever it might be. It just wouldn't be as good of a book as yours. Right.
I'm not saying that.
Okay. And so we'll go back around. We'll go the opposite way. Mario, your letters from Italy. What if it were letters from, I don't know, pick a country?
Yeah, I mean, there are certain ways that it would relate, because I think people did, people left their own countries, like Ireland. They left their countries during the time of the famine to find work elsewhere, sent money back. So there are certainly common elements of people looking for a better life. But as C just said, I mean, there are unique qualities to Italian culture. And like, for example, I don't know that people would sit around the table and talk about food in the same way in Ireland as they would in Italian, right? In Italy. And, even describing the history and the strange customs and, it all centers around, I mean, that's unique to Italian culture. And every culture has their unique, qualities to it. But it would be a totally different book if it was from a different country.
I tend to agree. And Diana, what do you think? So if you were setting your books elsewhere and in a different country, in a different culture, everything else being the same in terms of the story, but again, it's a little different because you're using an actual event, and then but maybe the person then goes to a different country and is promised to marry someone in a different country.
I mean, Maria Carolina originally was intended to be the Queen of France. She was originally intended to be in the position Marie Antoinette is in. And if you get into the deep, dark corners of the web, you could actually, I don't want to say deep, dark, but dark corners of the web, there is the what if when it comes to Maria Carolina. Like, what if she was the Queen of France and not Marie Antoinette? Like, how would French history change? And then when we were talking, everybody was answering your question. My mind went back to my first book, which actually started off in Brazil, because Anita Garibaldi was a gaucho in Brazil. And with her story with Giuseppe Garibaldi, and for those who aren't familiar with him, he's the guy who basically made Italy what it is today. He was the man who basically created unification and fought very much for it. And he learned so much about fighting, and he honed his skills and his dream for Italy in Brazil with Anita by his side. And Anita and her passion, that was able to come through and maybe affect Italy in and of itself for the unification, because she had a huge effect on him and on the war in the very beginning. But that element, I don't think would quite work if they were from other countries. And I don't say that to be mean to any other countries. But a lot of what happened within Italian history shaped who he was. And even with both of these women and their husbands, because let's face it, Maria Carolina's husband, Ferdinand, was a notorious dolt and a big goofball. He was very much a product of Naples as she ended up being. And I really don't think you could have one without the other.
No,
I couldn't have them without Brazil and Italy.
Right.
And even Naples itself, because Naples, let's face it, is one of those cities that is a world in and of itself.
Exactly.
And yeah, the book's gonna work.
Yeah, no, listen, don't sound apologetic. You're selling it. You're sold. I mean, we believe you. Rob, what do you think?
This is a great question, by the way, Lee. I have a fairly complex answer. So even though my books are thrillers, the theme of the books is basically how far would you go for your soulmate? So I think that that's kind of a universal theme that could be applied to a lot of different settings and even stories. Now that said, my first book, The Prisoner of Paradise, revolves specifically, as I mentioned, around a real painting by a real artist, Paradise by Tintoretto. And as I mentioned, it's the world's largest painting. It's enormous, and it has, in real life, like 500 or more people in it. Maybe like 700 people actually painted into this painting. And it's a huge part of the plot. So not only, and there's nothing else like it in the world. Nothing's ever been created like that. Well, hold on for a second. There's a big asterisk on that. Which I'm going to get to. So the first book, there's no way I could set it outside of Italy. I couldn't even set it outside of Venice, actually. It's just, and also not only that, but like the city of Venice itself is also very much a character in my book. Very, very much. Like there's so much that happens that is unique to this very unique place called Venice. And now that said, it is a series, okay? And in real life, Tintoretto actually painted 3 versions of this painting. So that's the asterisk when I said there's nothing else like it. He did do 3 versions, and in real life, one of the other versions is in Madrid, and the other one is in the Louvre in Paris. So it's a trilogy, and you can kind of imagine where I'm going. Book 2, part of it does take place in Madrid, and book 3 hasn't come out yet, but obviously not all of it is set in Venice, but big chunks of it are. As well. And then I also have some spin-offs like The Swordsman of Venice, which actually is not even set in Venice, but it is set in Italy, and that one would not be able to, I couldn't set that anywhere else either.
It's so true. When I was reading about your work and I saw that one line, there's that one line, and when I read, how far would you go for your soulmate? I thought, oh, what a great, that's a universal question. I mean, so that's a great hook. So let's end with a very fun question. And so Mario, let's start with you. And I know you have to dash. Tell me the one Italian food you absolutely cannot live without. You have to pick one. It has to be one.
Just one? Okay.
Just one.
So in Rome, one of my favorite places, it's the Abruzzi restaurant. They serve the best rigatoni alla carbonara. It is the best in all of Italy, and I can't live without it.
Can't live without it.
And I'm going to have to sign off and go direct my choir class, but it's been great to see all of you. Diana, I want to talk to you because my next book is placed during the Risorgimento.
I'd love to chat with you.
I want to connect with you. So,
yes.
Mario, thank you so much for joining us.
Ciao, Mario.
Ciao tutti. Ciao.
Ciao. Okay, C, what's one Italian food you can't live without?
Cavatelli pasta. It's so interesting because my grandpa always had a love for that as well. So we'd have it a lot at Sunday dinners. And so it's always been one of my favorites. And then I learned way later on that it's actually a food from the area he's from in Italy. So I never got to ask him if that's why or what, but that is my favorite. And every time I eat it, I think of him.
Who knows? Maybe that's why you didn't even know that's why it was your favorite. Rob, how about you?
Can I just say pasta?
You can.
That's what I was going to say too.
And then it's like, no, but Cavatelli.
I can narrow it down maybe, but if I'm allowed, if that's an allowable answer, I know that's
and certain pastas, depending on the dish, you want, you know, sometimes you want the long pasta, sometimes you want thin, sometimes you want the smaller. So, you know, it's a very delicate process. But no, you're certainly allowed to say that. Diana, is that what you were going to say?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. And I think it was so funny once. So my husband's not Italian, and I call him Italian by association because we've been married for so long. He's practically Italian now.
Exactly. He can't get away from it.
Exactly. And one night, you know, the age-old married question, what are we having for dinner? Mm-hmm. And I just said, pasta. And he just stopped. And he was like, what do you mean pasta? That tells me nothing. And then this little white Irish boy starts listing up every single pasta that he could think of and was like, what are we having? And like, he forced me to narrow it down. At the time, it was just spaghetti. Because he's very much a spaghetti lover. But I think if I had to narrow down my pastas, my favorite pasta from the time that I was a child is tortellini. Tortellini is my absolute favorite.
And if I was going to narrow it down, actually, I was going to say either tortellini or gnocchi with pesto sauce.
Yes.
Gnocchi is such a good one. And it's one that I think that was the first pasta I actually made, like got to make on my own.
Made from scratch.
Yeah.
Well, I know I'm hungry now. I don't know about the rest of you, but
it's actually lunchtime.
Well, I just want to thank all of you so much. This has been so enjoyable. As I said, I was so excited about this theme. I think it's such a fabulous theme for all of us here at Bookish Road Trip. And if we want to go around just very quickly one more time, if you want to tell us again the name of your books and where we can find you, if you would like to do that, that would be great. C, do you want to start?
Sure. My books are The Difference and The Visitor. And I am on all the social media you can think of. Everything is C. D'Angelo author without the apostrophe.
C. Without the apostrophe. Okay, good. And Rob?
Yeah, I'll show the first one easier to remember. So The Prisoner of Paradise. It's a dual timeline thriller or historical thriller set in Venice. And it's available everywhere as obviously a paperback, hardcover, ebook, or audiobook. And by the way, the narrator is amazing. Zach Alleman is the narrator. And my website's robsamborn.com. I'm also on every single social media platform you can think of. Mostly Rob Samborn is the username. And I also want to thank you, Lee, so much, and Diana and C. This has been fantastic.
Thank you. Diana?
Well, yeah, I'm all over the social media, as everyone else has said, and my social media handle is Diana G. Author, because I am not going to put everybody through the rigorous role of trying to spell Giovinazzo. So I totally understand that. My two books, Antoinette's Sister and The Woman in Red, are found throughout everywhere books are sold.
Your book cover, if I may say, Antoinette's Sister, your book cover is beautiful.
Thank you. I'll try to move aside so people see.
I'm always drawn to book covers. I don't know that I buy books just on the book cover, but that one is stunning. That one's beautiful.
I love it. And then the paperback just came out as I roll away. Just came out in November, and I love what they did with it, where it's a green.
Yes, I saw that. And I was okay. So that was the difference when it came out in paperback. They did it. Okay, all right, there we go. Okay, well, thank you again so much to our guests. Thank you for everyone who joined us today. And hopefully you will check out the books of these amazing, talented authors. And again, I'm Lee Bukowski, your host for the Bookish Road Trip Roadshow. And we'll see you next month.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.